Ever feel like that voice in your head is your own worst critic? Like no matter what you do, it's never enough. You are so not alone. We're diving into some really insightful strategies today from this guide on healing low self-esteem. And get this, it's not just about thinking happy thoughts. This is about taking action, real steps to rebuild how you see yourself, your self-worth.
Yeah, what really struck me when I first looked at this was how it gets to that, core of what self-esteem really is. It's not just, surface confidence. It's way
Uh,
deeper than that.
mm.
It's really about the fundamental lens that you see yourself through,
It's true. And, I think we've all had those experiences that kind of chip away at how we see ourselves. Maybe it's stuff from childhood or relationships that were tough or even like those big setbacks. They leave a mark.
They really do. And what I thought was so interesting about this guide is how it talks about approaching those experiences not with judgment, not with blame, but with self-compassion.
Okay, self-compassion. It's like one of those buzzwords, right?
Yeah.
But how do we actually like put it into practice? What does the guide say about that?
It really boils down to treating yourself the same way you'd treat a really close friend. Think about it. You wouldn't bash a friend for messing up, would you?
No way.
You'd be supportive. You'd encourage them. So it's about showing yourself that same grace.
That makes a lot of sense. But how do we actually quiet that negative self-talk? Like those thoughts, ugh, I'm such a failure, or I'll never be as good as.
Right, right. Well, the guide actually uses this really helpful metaphor. It suggests picturing those negative thoughts as coming from somebody else, almost like an annoying house guest.
Oh, I like that.
You don't have to believe everything that they're saying, right?
Definitely not. It's like saying, hey, I hear you, negative voice, but I'm going to focus on something else.
Exactly. And it actually gives you a bunch of techniques for challenging those negative thought patterns head on. One of the most powerful ones is this thing called thought stopping.
Hmm.
Basically, it's about interrupting those negative thoughts the second you notice them.
So instead of going down that rabbit hole of negativity, it's more like hitting the brakes and going in a different direction.
Exactly. And one of the best ways to do that, to redirect, is by focusing on those small wins.
Oh, I love that. And the guide had a whole section on this, right?
Yeah, and it makes a really good point that even little achievements, things that might seem insignificant, can be so empowering.
That is so true because I feel like we get so caught up in like the big picture, those really big goals, but it's the small victories along the way that really build us up, It's like this guide knows me because sometimes even just getting out of bed and making myself do that to-do list feels like a huge win.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it really wants you to savor those wins no matter how small, because each one of those, it's like a building block, proof that you are capable and resilient.
It's so easy to just brush over those little wins, but they totally add up, don't they? So we've talked about facing those negative thoughts, celebrating the little victories. What else does this guide say about getting on the road to better self-esteem?
Well, it goes into this idea that's so important, surrounding yourself with the right people. That can make all the difference.
It's so true. Being around certain people, it either lifts you up or it's like they drain you. Like some people, they just have this energy where you feel seen, you feel valued.
For sure. And this guide, it actually talks about being mindful of your social diet, which I thought was interesting.
Oh, I like that, your social diet.
Yeah, it's not just what you're putting into your body, but what you're feeding your mind, your soul,
Yeah.
Through the people you're spending time with.
That is so true. It's like, are you getting your social nutrients? And, the guide talks about how this ties into boundaries, right? Setting those healthy boundaries.
Mm.
So it's like we're really paying attention to who we're letting into our lives, making sure they're good for our self-esteem. But what about when, we hit those bumps in the road? Even if we're doing all the right things, they're always going to be setbacks, failures. How does the guide say we deal with that?
Well, that's where this whole idea of reframing failure comes in.
Mm-hmm.
And the guide had a really cool way of looking at it.
Oh, yeah.
It's instead of seeing setbacks as, the end of the line, think of them more like detours or even plot twists.
Mm.
You might not be on the path you expected, but it could actually lead you somewhere even better.
Mm-hmm. I totally get that. It's like those times you think, that's it, game over. But then later you realize, whoa, if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't be where I am now.
Yeah, exactly. And this whole thing about reframing, it really comes down to something the guide talked a lot about. It's called a growth mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, it's believing that you can always learn and grow. Your abilities aren't just fixed.
So those times we call failures, they're less about messing up and more about getting the lesson so we can do better next time. It's like the guide was saying, don't sweat the stumbles. You'll get back up stronger.
Exactly. It's more about learning from what happened than beating yourself up. And you know what? This actually connects back to the self-compassion thing we were talking about before.
Oh, right. I see it. So instead of being super hard on ourselves, we can try to be kind, like we would be with a friend going through something tough.
Exactly. They're all works in progress, right? Setbacks are just part of being human. Nobody's perfect.
Okay, so we've got quieting that negative voice, being kind to ourselves, looking at those so-called failures differently, and choosing who we spend time with wisely. Anything else in this guide for like boosting our self-esteem? Because it seems like it takes more than just trying to think positive, you know? That's never really worked for me.
Totally. It does take more. That's where those practical tools the guy talks about come in. One that really stood out to me was this strengths inventory idea.
Strengths inventory. Okay, tell me more, because I mean, we all have strengths, right? Even if sometimes it's hard to see them in ourselves.
Right. So the guy actually tells you to, like, grab a notebook and pen and write down all your
Let's
strengths,
sort of.
your talents, your accomplishments. It's about creating this, like, physical reminder of everything you're good at.
Oh, I love that. It's like making your own hype file. So we're talking big wins, but also those little things we're good at that we don't always give ourselves credit for.
Totally. Even if it's something like being a good listener or super organized, those are still strengths.
And the guide says to, like, look at this list whenever you're feeling down on yourself, right? Like a secret weapon against those negative thoughts.
Exactly. It's about shifting that focus from what you think your flaws are to all the things that make you, you.
Instead of listening to that inner critic, we can be like, hold up, I've got this whole list of awesome things about myself. Love it. So what else can we do to make these positive changes stick?
Well, something else the guide mentioned that I found really helpful was this idea of daily affirmations, where you say positive things to yourself regularly.
Yeah, affirmations. It's like training your brain to focus on the good stuff, right? Like
Yeah.
saying, I am capable or I am worthy. Do I have that right?
Yep, exactly. And it might seem kind of simple, but the guide was really clear about being consistent with it.
Pick affirmations that really speak to you and say them every day or even write them down.
Just like anything else, consistency is key, right? Like go to the gym once isn't going to get you results. Got to make it a habit.
Exactly. Maybe work it into your routine, like when you're brushing your teeth or first thing when you wake up. The more you do it, the more those positive thoughts become automatic.
Like you're rewiring your brain, replacing those old negative messages with ones that are actually helpful.
Exactly. You're basically creating a whole new internal dialogue, one that's kind, accepting, and believes in what you can do. It's like we can finally let go of all that baggage, those negative beliefs we've been holding on to for like ever.
It's huge. And one thing the guide really emphasizes is that this isn't about like suddenly having perfect self-esteem all the time. It's more like realizing that it's going to have ups and downs, just like, life in general.
So it's okay if we have those days where we don't feel so great. We're not like failures because that inner critic pops up sometimes.
Not at all. Actually, the guide talks about those ups and downs as being totally normal, just
Right.
part of the process. It's like when you're first learning to ride a bike.
Yeah.
Right? You're going to wobble. You might even fall a couple times.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean you'll never get it.
That's such a good way to put it. We got to be patient with ourselves like we would be with a kid learning something new. You wouldn't tell a kid to just give up because they fell off their bike, right?
Exactly. And that's what I liked about this guide. It's not about trying to be perfect, which is like impossible anyway. It's about building a better relationship with yourself, one that's more understanding, more resilient,
Yeah.
It's got to be able to handle the good and the bad.
So it's like we're learning to be our own biggest fans, even when things are tough. This has been amazing. We covered so much today. Quieting that inner critic, being kinder to ourselves, looking at those so-called failures differently, and really owning our strengths. As we wrap up this deep dive, what's like the one thing you hope people listening will take away from all this?
For me, it's that healing, this whole journey of self-esteem, it's not about reaching some finish line. It just keeps going. And it takes effort, being consistent. And like we were talking about, being kind to yourself along the way.
It's so easy to get discouraged when you don't see results right away, but anything worth having takes time,
Absolutely. But like the guide said, it's worth it. Because when you feel good about yourself, it affects everything. You show up differently, you're more confident, more yourself, and that impacts all parts of your life.
That's so true. So to everyone listening, remember, you are worthy, you are capable, and you have everything you need to create an amazing life for yourself. Until next time on The Deep Dive, keep exploring, keep growing, and never stop believing in yourself.